Thank you for joining us for this episode of The State of Leadership, Simple and Beyond. That is Robert Hilliard. I am Whitney Wiley, and we are here on Thursdays, 3 p.m. Eastern, 12 noon Pacific, talking all things leadership. And today we're going to be talking about purpose of leadership, your purpose as a leader, as one of the components of the simple leadership method. So if you have been following along over the year plus, we've been doing this like a year and a half, Robert.
Oh, wow.
I know, right?
Like, wow.
Time flies.
Yep. I remember when this was just an idea.
I know, right? And here we are. And so things are good, things are well. But the simple leadership method, there are 6 components to it: self-awareness, intentionality, mastery, purposefulness, leverage, and energy. And today we're going to be talking about purposefulness, and your purpose as a leader, right? So there is a reason that we have leaders. And so we're going to talk about that and how you can tap into your purpose and be the best leader that you can be. Any opening thoughts on this, Mr. Hilliard?
No, it's just very hot in New York today. So, so if you see me sweating, going off camera, I'm just doing some of that. I haven't, got the ACO set up yet.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, but I do have some opening remarks.
The fun of live television.
Yeah. I remember when we were putting this together and we were looking at the distinction between being intentional and being purposeful. And one of the things that you said it very well, and one of the things that I want to just really emphasize is that this is part of our framework. And so we use words purposely,
however, and intentionally.
Yes, we did both. And they are for, in the context of this program, in this framework. So with that, I'll just segue right into it. So when we talk about intentions, we're really talking about your vision and your action plans that you're conceptualizing with your team. You're putting all those things together. When we talk about purpose, now we're talking about goals and tasks. And this is really where you deploy the individuals and the teams to do the work. And it's really where the rubber meets the road. So now it's like we've been working from the very, cerebral portion of this, your self-awareness. And now we're getting down to the I use this term a lot. It's an old-fashioned nitty-gritty. We're getting to the nitty-gritty where you're actually deploying people to do the actions that you set way back when you were talking about your vision and putting those action plans together.
And what I would add to that is that this really gets to why you are doing what you're doing. And sort of the way I look at the difference between the two is that you have a why you do what you do. Why are you leading? Right? Why do you have a team? Right? The why behind it. And then your intention taps into sort of the how you go about doing your why. Sort of the way I have tried to separate, because a lot of times, and I'm glad you actually brought this up, a lot of times people see intention and purpose sort of intertwined, and they are, right? And all of the components that we're talking about, they rely upon each other. None of them are in a vacuum. And so I'm glad you actually brought that up. So I want to just start with what is purpose, and then talk about a couple of things that you can do that can help you in discovering that purpose so that you can be as effective and leading is possible. Without having a clarity about why you are doing what you're doing, it makes it difficult. I won't say impossible, but certainly makes it difficult for you to be as effective as you could be. And so, just simply put, purpose is the reason for doing something, right?
Mhm.
It's the reason that something is created and why it exists, the purpose for which it exists. And so, when you are tapping into your purpose, it can be personal, and the process that one goes through to figure it out can be introspective. And that's one of I think, big challenges that many people have when it comes to their how they lead and why they are leading, right? What we talk about leadership, first of all, I believe, I think you believe, but you can speak for yourself, that we are all leaders. We don't all have a title of leadership, right? And whether or not we lead well or effectively is a whole different story. And usually, when people are talking about leaders and leadership, the assumption is that it is done well, that you're great at it, etc. Right? That's sort of the default context in which we are talking about leaders. And so there's a distinguishing mark or distinguishing factor between being a leader and being someone who's actually leading followers in an organization. And so just you want to think about that, because there is a difference in maybe the way you approach being a leader at home or in your everyday life, and the way you would do something if you actually had a title in an organization. And so the concepts that we're talking about are applicable across the board. It doesn't matter. As it relates to corporate leadership, however, there are some very real consequences that happen for your organization if you are not leading well, if you're not leading effectively. And we've talked about this. You can look at some other episodes of the show. We've talked about this multiple times when you end up with people quiet quitting or loudly quitting or whatever, right? That this concept that people don't leave their jobs, they leave bad bosses. What can you do to keep that from happening, right? And tapping into the reason that you're in leadership in the first place, the reason that you're leading a group of people, not because someone bestowed upon you a title, but digging a little deeper can help you to take that first step so that you can actually, as Robert pointed out, tap into your vision. What is your vision for your leadership? What is your vision for your team? What are your shared goals, and how are you going to move your ship forward, right, if you don't know what it is that you're doing and why you're doing it?
Well, yeah, I mean, we're looking at this from two separate but interrelated um, viewpoints. The one is, the framework, and the other is in general. So your purpose it really is the why, like you said. And so when you're looking, you can look at it from two different viewpoints. When we talk about it for yourself as a leader, what's your purpose? Why are you engaged in this work? Why are you engaging with your team the way that you are? What's your reason for doing that? And then the second part of that is, when you look at the framework, is all the stuff that you need to do to go along with your purpose, so that it is very clear to you and clear to your team why this goal is set, why this task is set, why I have to do that. The other thing that I want to just touch on is when it comes to leadership, and this is very funny, and I don't want to get too far off topic, but I think it's relevant. When we were right before I went back to grad school, I remember having dinner with a friend of mine and her significant other, and they started, what are you doing? Oh, I'm going back to school, and
I said, why would you do that?
well, no, that wasn't.
Who does that?
What are you going to major in? I said, well, organizational development and leadership. And my friend's boyfriend chuckled, and she was, oh yeah, he thinks that leaders are born, not made. And I think that kind of thinking is dangerous for a lot of different reasons. And I don't want to go too far off on that. But one is someone, and my answer to that is, well, someone is considering you a leader. Someone in your lifetime, regardless of whether or not you have a title or whether or not you think that you're not a natural born leader. I mean, I don't know too many people coming out of the womb with leadership theories in their head, and it's just ridiculous to me. I'm sorry, I don't usually say that on the show, but to me that is. Certainly, that person's thinking, well, the qualities, and they're talking about the great man theory,
Right.
where you're tall, you have certain genetic attributes that make people consider you a leader. That doesn't make you a leader. I know many tall people, tall men, that they're not very good leaders. But the bottom line is, if you don't think you're a leader, someone considers you a leader. And to that person, you are. Whether it's a niece, a nephew, if you don't have children, it's your kids if you do. It may be people around the neighborhood. They may see that they may think you're a leader or consider you a leader because you're very knowledgeable. So the idea is that everybody is a leader because someone considers them.
Right.
That's how I look at it.
No, I think that's exactly right. But we're not generally talking about people in their everyday lives, right? We're generally talking about, when the conversation comes up about leaders and leadership, we're generally talking about those people who have positions, they have titles, and whether or not they're doing a good job, right? Whether or not they're doing an effective job, whether or not they are doing it well. And therefore, while we wanted to just lay out that distinction, know that what we're talking about is applicable across the board.
Absolutely.
And certainly the framework is about you as a person, right? So there's this dichotomy of leadership that happens as well, that touches into this conversation of being purposeful and purposefulness, is that leadership isn't about you, the leader, but this aspect of leadership is only about you, right? Your development as a person that can then lead well, lead effectively. So leadership is not about you, but it's all about you. And so, and having that clarity of understanding makes a huge difference in how you then can move forward. I was talking with someone, a client actually yesterday, and she was sharing, her experiences with people that are less than great leaders, effective leaders, right? People who are CEOs of companies, and not insignificant companies, right? And wondering how these people got the positions. And this is something we've talked about over and over again, whereas people that we tend to think that have this piece of clarity about what it is they're doing, right? And we can start to tap into this. Why are you a leader? What is your job and your role as leader. And a leader's purpose is to inspire, is to guide and serve the team, right? And that is the purpose, and to serve the team, the organization, and to help move towards a common goal or vision. And that's not that difficult a concept to wrap your head around. That is the purpose. So why is it so challenging?
You're asking me that question?
Sure. It was rhetorical, but you can answer it. Or we can answer it.
Well, it's challenging because people get their egos invested in it, and which is a natural thing. You know, people are going to. We all have egos. The issue is whether or not relying on your ego is serving you. It may look like it is in the moment when a leader comes in and they are very forceful, and there's a time and a place for force. And I don't want to, you know, exclude that, but that's a rare instance when you need to do that. The house is on fire. You need to mobilize the troops right now. There's nothing wrong with being very directive and even forceful. However, there are some people that look at that and they think that that is the only way to lead. So they look at every situation, whether it's a small deviation or a existential deviation, they look at it the same and they treat it the same. And of course, it may feel good to this leader when everyone scrambles around to do what they're asking them to do, or they're very fearful. However, there is a toll that is paid when that happens. You know, there's a toll to be paid when that happens. And I always, you know, since you know I'm a certified science fiction nerd, I always like to equate that to the dark side of the force. It's going to get you what you want, but you're going to end up looking like the emperor, you know, all shriveled. I mean, it's just not going to work well for you in the long term. And so you're looking for that long-term sustainable leadership that's going to inspire other people, that's going to create a cohesive team, that is going to be a team that will look at conflict not as something that should be avoided,
right,
but something that could help solve the challenge, and maybe in a very innovative way. This whole thing about this frictionless, that's a myth. That doesn't happen, right? And if it's happening, I can almost guarantee that there is no innovation or any kind of forward thinking happening, because people are too afraid to engage in that. Or you may have the opposite, because people follow what the leader will do. And if the leader is being, you know, forceful, like I say, looking at deviations, small deviations and those existential deviations in that way, your team is going to treat everything the same way. They're going to imitate that behavior. And that's one of the things that we see happening all the time. I've worked with many organizations where the top leadership, they never took ownership or a responsibility or accountability for anything that happened, and they blamed other people. Everybody in the organization was doing that, and that is not very healthy for the organization. It's not very healthy for the employees of the organization.
True. So what does one do in terms of, so if your general purpose is to inspire and to guide, to empower, right? How do you tap into that? How do you act in alignment with that? And so acting purposefully in your leadership, right? Tapping into that means, which goes back to the distinction between intentionality and purpose as we're defining it. acting purposefully in your leadership, acting in alignment with your purpose means actually being intentional and deliberate, right?
Mhm.
Being deliberate in your actions, in your decisions, uh, basing them on your core values,
Mhm.
and being tied and connected to the core values of the organization and the goals that you're working for and with, right? And it involves being clear about your vision, being able to set goals, clear goals, communicating them effectively, building relationships within, and being cognizant of the fact that you are leading by example.
Yeah.
And therefore, the reason that you have to be intentional and deliberate is because if you are not, as you are taking action, as you are making decisions, other people are paying attention to not just what you do, but how you go about doing it. And looking at whether or not you are in alignment with the values that you espouse and the values of your organization. And if they're not in alignment, it creates problem with you being able to build trust and therefore those relationships.
Yeah, absolutely. You've already done the work. So we're talking about the framework. You've already done the work. You already did that. You already looked and was like, okay, what's my vision? You did that with the self-awareness. You were intentional about it. You shared your vision. You got to know the values of your team. You know what motivates them. You know they know what motivates you. They know your values. They know your expectations. And you were very masterful in communicating that message. And now you've done the work. If you follow our framework, now you're executing. You
Yeah.
are creating those performance standards. You're setting those goals. You're monitoring individual and team performance. You're giving rewards when agreed actions are hit, and you're correcting when things deviate. And one of the things that we like to mention, and I kind of hinted at this, not every deviation is the same. You correct them accordingly, and that's really important. And I've seen firsthand the effects of leaders. I think I wrote an article about it. Leaders that they only had one style of corrective action, and that was terror. Right? And in this particular case, that person was removed from the organization. The employees thought that complaining, they're complaining, or they're I should say, I don't want to say they were complaining, but they were telling other people about their behavior. They thought it was falling on deaf ears, and perhaps it was. But what happened was the accumulation finally hit a critical mass, and the person in charge of the organization had no choice but to remove. So, not to harp on that, but you don't look at every single deviation from a goal or a task the same. We don't all work in as air traffic controllers. That's different. Those are very, very strict. Any deviation can be catastrophic, right? Or we don't work in nuclear regulatory systems. Those deviations can be catastrophic. Um, most things can be used as an opportunity to teach and coach and move people along so they can be better. So that's, being purposeful is really about looking at the actions that you take for yourself and for your team and engaging with them in that way, deliberate manner, like you said.
It's interesting that you brought up air traffic controllers and in some other scenarios, because when I'm training on this, we're talking about learning organizations, right? We're talking about creating environments where people are allowed to make mistakes, to learn, to grow, because that's where innovation comes from. When you don't have people who are afraid of making mistakes. Of course, there are those environments, those jobs. There are some things where a mistake is catastrophic,
Mhm.
right? And the innovation is not a part of it. That now is not the time.
No.
Now is not the
Now
time,
is the
right?
time to innovate, right?
Um, but there are, even in those industries, even in those jobs, there are, if you step back from the time when you're actually doing the job, and you step outside and created a framework or an environment where people are training, right, so they can test different things to see if there is another way, right, because you don't want, the only times that you make steps forward, progress, is after someone has lost life, limb, right? And then you can go, oh, we could have done it this way. So you create, you have the ability, right? And this is something that a leader would either initiate or encourage those that they're leading to initiate outside of the time that you're actually doing the work, right? To test some theories, test some hypotheses to see if you can create innovation, create steps forward that are not simply learned because you something horrid has happened.
Correct.
Like, we shouldn't have to learn that it is, or shouldn't have had to learn that it is best to ride in cars, with seatbelts on or with airbags, because of the numbers of people who have lost their lives in those, right? So there, uh, we can be creative and innovative and still, right, protect those times when we need to do things a particular way, and continue working towards, what is it, continuous improvement,
Mhm.
right, and not wait for the awful things to happen before we make those decisions.
Absolutely. I agree. It's really important to spend some time to think about how you can improve things. I don't think a whole lot of organizations do that. I know certainly the organizations that I've spent some of my, working as an employee, not coaching, they didn't do that. It was like, here's your job, you do your job. It was just, you're just a cog in the machine doing those things. It wasn't until a very bad thing happened that they were trying to fix, they're trying to fix they're trying to build the plane while it's flying. It's like,
Oh my God, that is okay. So here's like the weirdest thing. I've never heard that phrase, and over the course of the last 3 days, there's 3 different people that said
there are no mistakes.
it. I was like, where'd that come from? It really
It's
weird.
yeah, with the we're going to talk about this with the popularity of VUCA. That is one of the phrases that's kind of come up a lot. Build the plane while you're flying it. That's one of the phrases that people usually, when they talk about VUCA, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. It's one of the things that one of the metaphors that seems to pop up a lot. But there are a lot of people that do that. I remember this is, and I try not to disparage any organization because running any organization is difficult.
Yes.
It's not it's easy for us to sit here and go, oh, they can do this, but when you're in the throes of things, when you have tradition and history to uphold, and you have all those cultural things that you're working with as a leader in an organization, and you're trying not to go against, trying not to buck tradition or go against the culture or be counterculture. It's very difficult.
Right.
But I remember working in an organization and getting hired there and had some very specific duties. In addition to my title. And I remember asking, what is your disaster recovery process? And they said, we don't have one. And I was like, huh, that's very interesting. And it was something that I remember. Now, this was kind of loosely related to my job, wasn't part of my responsibilities. And I remember bringing it up a couple of times. And then Hurricane Sandy hit.
Mm.
And they weren't prepared. And after Hurricane Sandy was over, it became, well, we need to have some kind of disaster, because people couldn't get into they didn't know whether or not the offices were going to be open. They didn't know if things were going to be working. They didn't have a secure facility for people.
Yeah.
And those are all things that I had been a part of in other organizations, and I just kind of brought that up. And it was just very interesting to me, and I resisted my urge to say, "See, I told you so." I didn't do that, but what I did do was get involved in helping to make sure that the disaster recovery from that point, that whatever program they put in place was executed logically, because it was the first time they've ever had one. And this was an organization that had been around for a long time. So it's really difficult for people to, and you, I know it won't surprise you, but I think that maybe some of our listeners might be surprised to hear how sometimes when leaders bring forward an idea, it doesn't necessarily have to be innovative. It can just be new.
Yeah.
And their constituents will bat it down, and then or sometimes harshly. So it's not always that easy to introduce new ideas and innovation into established organizations, because they sometimes have a habit of just, well, if it's not broke, why fix it?
Right.
It's never, there have been other hurricanes before and superstorms before. What will be the difference? Well, they're not all the
Well,
same.
you don't know, but
Right.
it becomes the thing, right?
Right.
And so this, you're right, right? It just sort of human nature, and this doesn't apply to absolutely everyone, but human nature is we're pretty resistant to change.
Absolutely.
And so the thought that we would, voluntarily, going back to the point earlier about creating opportunities to learn and grow and not waiting for disasters to happen. It's easier to wait for the disasters to happen because we don't particularly care for change. And two, there is a part of us, again, human nature, that is, optimistic that things are always going to be the way they are, right? It's just going to be smooth sailing. And as you were talking, the pandemic popped up, right? And you didn't need to have a disaster plan for the pandemic, right? This particular pandemic, in order to have a plan for what happens if we can't get into work for an extended period of time. What happens if, right? You could role play some scenarios and have in mind a pathway forward. Doesn't have to be exactly what happens, but that one would not have thought something through and have a plan doesn't make sense. We're constantly told to be prepared, right? To spend 3 to 5 days without help. You need food and water and, communication and batteries and all these things. But somehow we don't think it applies to organizations that we are dependent on, right, for our everyday lives. And so I think the message here for you as a leader is that part of your job, your your purpose, right, is to be in a mindset of continuous learning, development, improvement, right? To stay up to date, cognizant of trends and practices, things that are happening. How can you bring those things into your organization? How can you inspire your people to continuously be thinking about what they can do that betters themselves, betters the organization? And if you get stuck in a place where you're not willing to entertain change, or maybe better yet, create change, right? You can find yourself going by the way of the dodo. And who wants that?
Right. Certainly the dodos, though. Uh,
Certainly not the dodos.
right. But it's really important, and I think that a lot of organizations, though, a lot of leaders in organizations did learn some lessons. The pandemic taught some people some things. There were some that didn't learn those lessons, but I think that many did learn those lessons and got more comfortable with change. You may not like it, but at least get more comfortable. We saw people, and there are still many organizations that are allowing their employees to work hybrid or work remotely. They haven't gone back to the office. We do have a couple that are, forcing people to go back, and that's up to them. We're not, saying one is better than the other. I know what I prefer, right? But some people prefer, and I have some clients that prefer to be back in the office.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with it. But it was a lesson. It was a lesson, and some people learned the lesson and are continuing to learn from that situation, and other people just saw it as an inconvenience, and now we can go back to business as usual. I often question people that, well, now that's over, that kind of thinking, because there's going to be something else.
Exactly, and that furthers the point, I think, about being purposeful, right? And being clear about what your purpose is. And some of that is being willing to contemplate and envisioning the future, right? What happens next? What are the possibilities? I like to think of all things, experiences, as OPP, and not the naughty by nature OPP, but opportunities, possibilities, and potentialities, right? And that if, as a leader, you are constantly keeping that in mind, it will help you to be innovative and flexible, nimble in your ability to respond to changing circumstances. Because here's the thing, whether you like change or not, whether you're comfortable with change or not, change is happening, is going to happen with or without you. And so you might as well look at what are the opportunities that present themselves in this change, in this scenario. What are the possibilities? What potential is here? And it ties to the reason that you are in the position that you're in, right? Or hopefully that's part of why you were tapped, selected for your role, or that you stepped up, right? If you're an entrepreneur, you started your own thing. That's the reason, that is the why behind it, is this the opportunities, possibilities, and potentialities that are out there, and your ability to work with them and move forward. So
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you know, and being really clear about your purpose. And I will do, as I say, I'll do some of this work for you. But one of the things, the purpose of a leader, I will say this, is that you need to do that work when it comes to being able to flex
yeah,
and being, so that your team can do that. So you need to role model that. Sure, certainly there needs to be standards and parameters, and I talked about that earlier. You need to have performance standards and all those things, but also those other opportunities where you need to, other circumstances, I should say, where you need to flex, where you need to be flexible, where you need to not be so rigid in your
yeah,
approach. You, as the leader, you have to be the one. Part of your purpose is to be the one that who sees that, calls that out, and prepares the team for that. And you know, talking about the pandemic, many people were just so unprepared for it, for something that many people knew were coming, and were talking about for, you know, at least 5 years prior. You
yeah.
know, we actually, this is what's funny about this. Before we even started, I remember this. Before we even started this show, you and I did a training together, and
Yes.
and the video that we showed was Bill Gates talking about the next big thing that's going to happen. What, you know, was going to be a global pandemic. Now, unfortunately, there are some conspiracy theorists like, well, he knew, and so, you know, because he created it. Because, you know, there's always people that think like, you're like, you know, I don't want to get
Well,
too off track, but there are some people that really believe that we're living in the science fiction that they see on TV. We are not. But there's some people that believe that stuff. But it was so funny, you know, we showed that, and we showed it as something, not because we were like, oh, look, there's going to be this pandemic coming. We showed it because we were like, okay, you need to prepare for all these things, and there's information out there that you can monitor. And, you know, so somebody says something like that, start monitoring it, start thinking about it, start tracking that stuff, start seeing if there's other instances of or mentions of that in, you know, the media, or so that way you can be prepared. We're always talking about the external environment exerting pressure on your organization. That was one of those things. and
yes.
and we just, you know, it was funny because we just randomly grabbed that thing. You know, I remember we're searching for, we're designing this workshop, and I said, "Yeah, this will be probably a good video to show, because it's talking about the next big thing." And we were talking about, look at what people are saying. You know, people that have information that you don't have access to sometimes will tell you about things that can help you. Be prepared and be open-minded about that. That's your job as a leader. And I think that was, you know, it's very funny. And sometimes you have to set aside your bias. And I made the joke about, you know, living in a science fiction society. Sometimes you got to put that stuff aside
Yeah.
and say, you know what, that's what you know, if you personally believe that, but what can I learn from what this person is saying that may be truthful and impactful? And so,
Wow. Yes.
but you remember that? That was, I remember we used that.
I do. I do. And yeah, and you're absolutely right. It just goes to the point that is the reason that you were tapped, right? Or at least should be part of the reason that you were tapped, is your ability to see things, to analyze things, evaluate, to look at the landscape, to test the external dangers that can come your way, and real or imagined,
Mhm.
right? That you take some time to say, or in your mind, real or imagined. Maybe it's imagined, but right. And it doesn't mean you have to spend, hundreds of millions of dollars preparing for something that may never come. But you do have to at least scan the landscape, as it were, to see what are the challenges, the external dangers that are out there that we should be cognizant of and can plan for. Here's the good thing is you don't have to plan for things individually. You can sort of look at them and say, what collectively, what impacts will these have?
Right.
And what can we do on a broad basis or in a general sense that will help us to be prepared to deal with those challenges as they come?
Absolutely.
That is part of your purpose as a leader. And so understanding that is essential for you to be effective in leading your team, leading your organization.
Yes.
So, Mr. Roberto, final thoughts?
You know what? I don't really have any final thoughts. I think I said everything. It was just one of those few episodes where I don't have anything else to add.
Well, I'm going to just say that, sort of wrap this up with your purpose, right? We've said this, your purpose is to inspire, to guide, to serve your team and your organization towards a goal, right? Towards the vision of the organization. Then within that, you have a vision of how you're going to lead. And that should be aligned with the understanding of what your purpose is and what you're doing for the people that you're leading, for the organization as a whole, right? If you can define your vision, your values, act in accordance with those, be effective in your communication. That means being clear and concise in what you're saying, and making sure that your messages are consistent and, again, aligned with vision and values. Build relationships. Lead by example and focus on continuous improvement. Yourself, right? Mastery. We talked about that previously. The continuous improvement of your organization, your people, right? All of that so that you can be prepared and adept for the challenges that come, both internal and external, right? You'll be living in your purpose as a leader. And ultimately, that's what we want for you, right? That's why we're here. And that is what we hope you walk away with from this particular episode. And so once you are clear on your vision and your purpose, you get intentional about what you do and how you do it, you're another step towards being the effective leader, right, that you are aiming to be. So with that, we want to thank you for joining us for this episode of The State of Leadership, Simple and Beyond. If there's anything that Robert and or I can do for you, you're looking for a coach, please reach out. I will drop in Robert's website so that you can check him out. He's got, we'll talk about what's on your website and how they can get in touch with you.
Well, there's articles. If you just want to go there and browse some of the articles, take a look, talk about many of the things that we talk about here in the show. And if you want to connect with me, if you're looking to develop your leadership presence, or you want to increase your team effectiveness by building a really good team culture, reach out to me. There's a form on there, and you can contact me there, and I'll get back to you.
Awesome. And if you are looking to make any shifts, any changes, transitions in your career, looking to navigate what you're doing in your work, reach out. Happy to be of service. If you're looking at making a transition from being an employee to an entrepreneur, I am working with clients in that capacity as well. On my website, you can get the free ebook, My Gift to You, Love Your Work. And there's another one. If you're struggling a little bit with maybe burnout, need to take it down a peg, pay attention. There is an ebook there as well that is about wellness, leading you to a better, healthier life so that you can pour from a full cup rather than trying to pour from an empty cup, which is impossible. So we want to thank you again. Again, reach out. If there's a topic you would like for us to cover on the show, please let us know. Our fourth Thursday of the month, we have book club this month. We are reading Dr. Joe Dispenza's Evolve Your Brain. Look forward to chatting with you about that in a couple of weeks. And until next time, take care.
See you soon.